The Lord of the Rings. So, for those that don't know, that was a clip from the first sort of installment of the Lord of the Rings movie kind of franchise. It was called The Hobbit, the first one there. It came from a book series as well. The author, J.R.R. Tolkien, was a Christian man, and he actually said that the story of Jesus was the greatest story ever told. So what his mission in life was to write books that would capture the hearts of people the same way that his story of faith and Jesus' story had. And he'd explain those principles of being a hero and a saviour and laying down your heart for the good of other people in these kind of fantasy type novels that have since been made into movies. So I love The Lord of the Rings. We connect well with stories. We connect well with narrative. We live out our own stories. That's just some of the way that we're wired. And that's why we love things like movies, TV shows, games, where we can experience being the hero, being on the good side of a good and evil battle. We like that sort of tale and that resolution. We connect well with that. And I don't know about you, but part of me, when I see a visual representation of a story, when I've watched movies like The Passion of the Christ and a couple of other biblical movies like Mary and Paul came out in the last couple of years, they actually help me to visualize when I'm reading the Bible some of the stories in it. So if you're like me and having some visual representation of story can actually be really helpful for me to catch my own story, my own narrative, and help me to sort of walk it out together. So for those of you who are visual people and don't mind story, I hope that was helpful for you. Lord of the Rings. Just by show of hands, who's seen The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings or read them? Who has ventured through that before? Great. Hands down. Hands up if you never have. That was the first time you've ever seen any of that before. Very cool. Can I recommend that you chat to your parents when you get home and see if they're cool for you to check it out? In my story, I was brought up knowing and loving The Lord of the Rings. So the books first and then the movies when they came out. So that has been part of my story. I love them. I got a lot of joy from them. The narrative, the storyline, I loved it. So we're going to look at it for a couple of weeks, how a story like this speaks to our story and speaks to God's story, and how we can see from a tale like The Lord of the Rings where we fit and where our narrative is. But fear not, even though I've been brought up with The Lord of the Rings and love it, Amos, who's speaking next week, and Nick Glenn, who's speaking the week after, they're pretty new to The Lord of the Rings. We didn't want to give you a total nerd fest where we went into deep dive. If you know The Lord of the Rings at all, you know you could spend years researching it all. The author wrote this backstory. He wrote an Elvish language. So Amos and Nick, if you are new to it, it's okay. They won't be super nerdy and geeking out on you because they're pretty new to the story too. So they're gonna sort of dance through it from that perspective. For those of you that haven't seen it, can I give you a super quick recap of the story so you know where we are? You might have been like, I've no idea what I was looking at just there. Basically, the story of the Hobbit. A hobbit, for those that don't know, is like a little person with big hairy feet, right? Sorry? Did someone just yell out their mate's name? That's super rough if that was the case. A hobbit is like a little guy. He's a fantasy character. So basically, the Hobbit is the story of this fantastic world called Middle-earth, which you got a map of there. Middle-earth, it's this land. And we just met the character Bilbo Baggins. He's the Hobbit. He's the main character of this story, The Hobbit, the first installment of the Lord of the Rings sort of books. And then he's like, a Hobbit's like this they're very safe, they're very orderly. You heard him at the start saying adventure. They're just the kind of things that make you late for dinner. No one likes adventure around here. We just want to have a nice hot cup of tea and 3 meals a day and no one disturb me, please. So Bilbo Baggins is kind of the idea of comfort. Hobbits are all about comfort. And then we also met Gandalf, who's this great wizard, right? He's both in The Hobbit, Bilbo's story, and then also The Lord of the Rings, which is where we meet Frodo Baggins. Gandalf's kind of like the God character, I guess, in a way. He's kind of calling on Bilbo out of his comfortable life into an adventure. So the adventure you saw a bit of there was Bilbo's story. They went to fight against a dragon with a group of dwarves. And you saw Bilbo's initial reluctance to leave his comfortable home and get involved in the adventure. But on this adventure, he finds a ring, okay? Everyone say a ring. The only reason I tell you that is because that's kind of the link to the bigger story with Frodo, the Lord of the Rings. Bilbo is Frodo's uncle. And at the start of the Lord of the Rings, which is 3 big books and 3 big movies if you want to watch them, Bilbo gives Frodo this ring. And ultimately, it's a long journey for Frodo to take this ring, which has great power, and destroy it. That's basically the story of Lord of the Rings in like a 2-minute version. So for all you massive fans, I'm sorry I didn't name all the characters and I probably just did a massive disservice to the tale. But for those that didn't know, I just wanted to catch you up. That's sort of where we were. So Bilbo, Frodo, Gandalf. And as I say, this story has something of us in it. Whenever my family used to watch movies, the credits would roll and my dad's most predictable phrase was, who was the Jesus character in that movie? Who was the savior? Who was the hero? Who laid down his life? Who had the biblical principles? And he'd literally ask that in every film we'd see, especially the epics like this, or like, has anyone seen The Matrix? Some of those ones that really clearly have a savior character and it's just the credits rolling like Dad's going to say it. Who's the Jesus character? And we'd be like, yeah, thanks, Dad. Neo is the Jesus character. But there is something of us in these stories. That's why we love them. That's why we can spot the Jesus character and these strengths. So I want to look at where we are in the Lord of the Rings. There is something inside of you that wants to find what you are made to do. And you will never be satisfied until you've found it. There's something inside of you that wants to find what you uniquely were made to do, and you won't be satisfied until you find it. I think that's where we find ourselves in Bilbo's story. He's a picture of comfort. He's a hobbit. He just wants to be comfortable. But Gandalf sees in something that he doesn't see in himself. He says, I need someone to come on an adventure. He invites him into a larger story than just a comfortable life that he's living on his own. And that was kind of what I wanted to be my first point tonight, just in the brief sort of summary as we talk about calling, is that there is an adventure. There is a larger story. You might be sitting here in the room thinking, I love these stories of heroes. You probably have something, you're like, that's the best movie or TV show or storyline that I've ever sort of dwelled on. I love these adventures. I love my favorite games. I love being the hero when I'm gaming. That's why I'm so drawn to it. But there's a far cry between what I see in the films and games and what real life feels like. But I want to tell you that there is a larger story that you are part of that you can choose to opt into or you can choose not to. There is an adventure that's larger than your own. And my question is, will you go? Will you go? We saw Gandalf there calling. As I said, Gandalf is kind of like the God figure. Turn to the person next to you tonight and say, is he calling? Turn to the person on the other side and say, is he calling? Because my belief is that if there is this larger story, there is this adventure for you to walk out and there is a unique purpose for your life, then I believe that he is calling. I believe he is calling you if you're sitting in the room tonight. I believe that you're made with a purpose, that you have a unique impact that you can have. And I believe that there is both callings that you'll have in your life that are unique to you, but I believe there's also this broader calling to be part of God's great storyline that we can read about in the Bible of restoring all of creation back to himself. You can be a part of that story. Is he calling, and will you go? So like Bilbo, you might have had a tugging in your heart, I believe you have, for something greater than yourself. The biblical equivalent would be the story of Jonah. You probably know that story, right? I'm not going to go into it for time's sake, but he's the guy that gets eaten by the whale. God tells him to go somewhere, and he says, I'm not the right guy for that job, and he heads in the other direction and he ends up in the whale. There's this calling of God that's available to us to a bigger story than our own. Will you go? Did you hear in that take, Bilbo said, I'm not a burglar. I'm not a burglar. And then what was Gandalf's line in response? The dwarves were kind of agreeing, yeah, he's actually not a burglar. Gandalf stood up and said, if I say he's a burglar, then a burglar he is. If Gandalf says he's a burglar, then he is a burglar. And he said, I see things in Bilbo that he can't even see in himself. Now, I've had times in my own life where I didn't feel like I was the burglar. I didn't feel like I was the right guy for the job. I felt like I'd followed God out of my comfort zone, maybe too far. And I felt like I was too much in the courage zone, not enough in the comfort zone. And I was the wrong guy for the job. I didn't have what it took in the moment. And I can remember having that same conversation with God. But the hope that I can sort of pass on to you is that who God says you are is who you are. If God calls you to be something, if God puts something in front of you and he says, walk out this adventure with me, walk out this journey with me, no matter how you feel about yourself, if you feel like you're not quite equipped for it, that's the hope that I want to pass on to you tonight, is that if God says you're ready for it, you're ready for it. You plus God and can do incredible things. So when we think about calling, I don't want you to be dissuaded by feeling like you're ill-equipped, because there's a famous line, God doesn't just call the equipped, but God also equips the called. God doesn't just call the equipped, but God also equips the called. If he has a task and a calling for your life, an adventure to pull you on, he will equip you for the task. If Gandalf says you're a burglar, then a burglar you are. I had one super quick thing. My mum, when I was sort of in my year 11 and 12, thinking about what study I was going to do with my life and what work I was going to do and where my life was headed, what my calling was. Is anyone in that zone? Sort of thinking where I'm at this junction, I can sort of choose my career and my uni course and what my future's going to be. My mum encouraged me and she said, think of it like this. You're in a ship and your boat is kind of docked at the moment. And you're waiting for God to tell you the exact coordinates of the calling that he has for your life. And you're staying in the dock until you hear that calling from God. And she said, what if God is waiting for you to pull your ship away from the dock and get it out into the open water where you have less control, and he's going to guide you to your calling or callings from there? She said, how about you go get a job? How about you go work somewhere? How about you go study somewhere? How about you go volunteer somewhere? So I did all those things. I pulled my ship away from the dock and I found myself in what I would now say is an adventure with God that I've been on for a number of years, where I felt out of my comfort zone. I left my comfort and went into courage, and I feel like God really steered my ship. I wonder if that encouragement is for anyone tonight. The equivalent in the Bible as well might be Moses. You'd all know the story of Moses. God tells him, I want you to free my people. I want you to talk to Pharaoh, who's like the big dog in Egypt. And Moses says, I can't even speak. I stutter. You've got the wrong guy. I'm not equipped for that. But God says, if I tell you you're equipped, you are equipped. So maybe that's an encouragement for some people in the room to pull your ship away from the dock. Don't wait for your calling. Don't wait for God to give you the coordinates of what your life's going to look like. But he has an adventure for you. Just pull your ship away from the dock and he'll help you to steer. My final point, I didn't go to that one, courage or comfort. Everyone say courage or comfort. Courage or comfort. My final point tonight is to find your why. Find your why. What I loved about the clips that we just picked was that you see Bilbo Baggins, the Hobbit, go from being the guy who was like, I don't want to go on an adventure, we don't want adventures around here, to then they gave him the contract and then he held it in his hands, he read through it, he was like one step closer toward adventure, because deep down he knew he wanted more than just a comfortable life. But he was freaked out by the contract and he said, no, you got the wrong man, I'm not doing it. And then in the morning, all the dwarves and Gandalf have gone on their adventure, and he wakes up and he realizes, crumbs, I really wanted to go on that adventure deep down. I wasn't comfortable with it. And you see this progression, and then at the end, he's actually on the adventure. That was where the video kind of froze up. And all the dwarves are saying, we know that hobbit that we hired. He was just in it for comfort. He loved his house. He loved his books. He didn't love being courageous. If we can't find him, it's probably because he's nicked back home. He's bailed on our journey before we've finished it. And Bilbo comes out and he says, I haven't gone home. I'm still here. If you've seen the movie, you'll know he was invisible for some reason at that stage. And the dwarf says to him, why did you come back? He asks him the question, why? Find your why. He says, why did you come back? And Bilbo says, I came back because I know how much I love my home, my comfortable home back in the Shire. And I know you guys are fighting to get your home. That's why we're on this adventure, to try and claim back your rightful home from this dragon. So he says, I wanted to do what I can to give you what I have and what you don't have. So he found his why for that moment. But I pose to you that he had a bigger why, and we have a bigger why. At any time in your life, you will have your own why for why you do certain things. Someone will say, why don't you get drunk? Why have you chosen not to have sex before marriage? Why do you do this? Why don't you swear as much as other people? Why do you fill up your Friday nights and your Sundays with going to church and hanging out with other people? And you'll be able to find a why for those moments. But I think there's a bigger why. There's a bigger why for us, and there was a bigger why for Bilbo too, just as I'm wrapping up. Bilbo's bigger why was that Gandalf saw something in him that he didn't see in himself, and it unlocked something in him that he knew he wanted deep down. He wanted to go on that adventure. He knew that once he'd tasted some adventure, once he'd been out there with the dwarves and seen the big wide world out there, if you watch the movies, you know that it changes Bilbo's whole life. He goes and he writes books and he draws maps, and that consumes him. He just wants to leave again and go on another adventure. He knew that had he have just gone home at that stage, he's had a taste of what life's like in this big adventurous calling that Gandalf had put on his life. So I think he had more of a why than just to help the dwarves at that stage, and that kind of plays out with the other adventures that he goes on. And I think for you and I as well, there's a bigger why on us than just why we don't do certain things that our friends might see us not doing. And I think I'm discovering that my bigger why is that I want to live a life that's dictated by who Jesus says that I am. And I want to live a life that seeks after him in the moments. I don't want God just to give me my big calling and say, one day you're going to be president of the US. And then I just track out over the next 40 years to become what he said then, right? I'd much rather live a life God calls us into a relationship with him, where he shows us little parts along the way and he guides us along the way, along the journey. That's my bigger why, is I want to live a life as a disciple and a disciple maker. I want to be known as a child of God, and I want to govern my life the way that Jesus says for me to live my life. That's kind of my bigger why. And all of the other stuff will fall into place because I have my big why decided already. My life might look very different in 20 years than it looks now, but I don't know if my why, my reason, will really change that much. Find your why. Can I get you to shut your eyes, team, for a moment? God, we don't just want to be comfortable, safe people that deny the adventure that we crave to be a part of. And we want to join into your larger story. Our culture and the world will tell us that we have to be great and we have to do really well and we have to make something of ourselves. We have to have followers. We have to have likes. We have to be influential. And that's so burdensome. That's causing us to be so anxious and burdened and bogged down. But God, we want to be part of your big story. You say, I'm writing this story of all of history. And I'm calling each person in this room tonight to be part of my big story. That's what you tell us, which is a much easier thing to carry. And God, when you say, I'm looking for someone to take on an adventure, we want to be in for that, God. When you call us, we want to say we are in for that, Lord. We want to respond with courage when you call us out of comfort. into a bigger story than we can make in our own. So team, the question tonight, just with your eyes shut, is he calling? He might be calling you. Like Bilbo said, he knew of Bilbo at the start. He said, Gandalf, you're the guy that has the fireworks. If you just know of God, but you don't know God, maybe that's what God is calling you towards tonight, to come and get to know him better. Not just to know of him, but to know him personally. Is he calling? Maybe God's calling you to engage. He might have put something on your heart, maybe a long time ago, that you've been squashing down and choosing comfort over courage. Then allow him to take you on that adventure and engage. If he said, I want you to do this great thing in the world, or I want you to do this great thing in your school, or it might even be a small thing, I want you to talk to this specific person, and you've been squashing it away, engage. He wants to take you on an adventure. Is he calling? If you're like I was and you've been waiting for God to drop your life's calling out of the sky and you haven't really steered your ship away from the dock yet, like I hadn't, because you've been waiting for God to give you the exact idea so you've still got control, then start to pull the ship away from the dock and watch as God steers you and your calling finds you. We say at Crossway, we want to be promptable. We want to hear from God and we want to act quickly. And make yourself available. Find the words. We also say at Crossway, I've been looking for someone to read the Bible with. I don't know if you'd be interested. That might be a really courageous and uncomfortable sort of thing to find your words around with your mates or people that maybe God would guide you to. But make yourself available to him. Seek to engage in some way. Maybe he's put some creativity in you that you've been saying, no, I'm too embarrassed to flesh that out and walk that out and own that. Don't squash the adventure away in you. If he's calling you on an adventure, answer him. He's looking for someone to share an adventure with. Answer him purposefully because he is calling.